Well, hello and welcome to the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live series. My name is Guy Stevens. I am the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. I am also the host for our podcast. So I get to wear a couple different hats here. If you're not familiar with who we are and what we do, just a real quick introduction. The Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint was formed about 5.5 years ago. We began really focused on the issue of physical restraint and seclusion happening in schools across the nation. As we have grown and our community has grown, of course, we are focused still on restraint seclusion, but we're also focused on a lot of other issues. We're focused on restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment. More broadly, often the things that are being done to children, very often in the name of discipline, in the name of punishment. We are heavily focused on not only helping to influence changes in laws and policies, but really focused on education. How do we move people in better directions? What are the better things we can and should do to ultimately better support individuals who are often having a difficult time, not giving someone a difficult time. So our work is really focused over a broad area of trying to make positive change in the way that we support a lot of individuals and work with other humans. Those of you that are joining us, I am really excited today to have a special guest with us, Diane Gould. And I will give you Diane's full background here in just a moment, but I've had the honor of knowing Diane for many years. And Diane's going to be talking to us a bit about our instincts around behavior and how they are all wrong. Before we get to Diane, though, I wanted to share a few housekeeping items. As many of you know, when we do these events, we do them live, and they are live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and on YouTube. And as you're watching live, you can put comments in, and we'll see those comments. We can respond to questions that you might have as well. If you're not watching live, of course, you can watch these again on any of those platforms. So after the fact, if you're not able to catch the whole thing live, you can go back to any of those platforms and watch. YouTube makes a really good place to do that. You can also download it as an audio podcast. So one of the things we do, it's not available immediately. It takes a day or two, but we make this available as an audio-only podcast so you can listen on the go. We also make a transcript available as well, and that may take us a little bit of time, but we try to get that done as soon as we can. So that's a little bit of housekeeping here. I do want to mention that we have been very fortunate in having some sponsors that have helped us to do this podcast all year long. In fact, one of our sponsors has been an annual sponsor that has helped us with the podcast, and that has been Connie Persick and Supportable Solutions. Many of you are familiar with who Connie is and Connie's work. Connie, of course, developed the Y Toolkit, is someone that I've frequently collaborated with and is a fantastic educational consultant, speech language pathologist, does a lot of amazing work. So let me share a little bit with you about the Y Toolkit.
Behaviors are signals to the deeper whys. The Y Toolkit, a tool built for and approved by teachers, parents, and administrators that can both assess and support individuals struggling with behaviors. Connie has created a document that turns typical behavioral documents upside down and replaces them with a deep dive into what really matters: how to support each child within a compassionate and relational framework based on their individual differences. The Y Toolkit was found to decrease seclusion and restraint by 21% in a year-long pilot study.
And of course, it is available on the Supportable Solutions website. One of the great things about the toolkit is you can actually get a single subscription for a single individual on the toolkit, which is about $20, I believe. So if you're a parent and you want to check out the toolkit and maybe recommend it to your school, you can get a subscription, check out the toolkit, and it's a $20 annual subscription. And of course, if you're working a school, it is something that can be used in schools for numerous individuals. And we want to thank Connie and Supportable Solutions for being a sponsor of our podcast. One other quick announcement before we get to our guest. We have an exciting upcoming event. We've got an event coming up. It is planned for January. It is a small conference called Supporting All Brains: How Neuroscience and Neurodiversity Affirming Approaches Can Better Support All Students, Teachers, and Staff. One of the great things about this event, it's a virtual event. It is being recorded. So if you get a ticket to the virtual event, you'll be able to go back and watch the recordings later. The tickets are only $29, which I think is really fantastic. And we did that intentionally. We really wanted this to be accessible for folks. But it's on January 20th, and it will run all day long from 8:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. And that's Eastern time here in the United States. But of course, if you're somewhere else in the world, you can make the adjustment, join whatever part you're able to live, but you can also go back and watch the recordings afterwards. And if you're with a school or organization, you can even contact us about buying bulk tickets if you'd like to. But we've got a great lineup. We've got Dr. Lori Desautel, who many of you know, professor at Butler University, the Applied Educational Neuroscience program. Lori has long been a friend of the Alliance and is fantastic. But we have some really amazing topics here. We have becoming neurodiversity affirming, neurodiversity behavior and the problem with PBIS, neurodiversity affirming approaches to navigating challenging behavior, change makers, do-it-yourself strategies for sharing trauma-informed practices, co-regulation in the classrooms, how learning to support my neurodivergent child is making me a better parent, human, teacher, and human. Calm brains, calm bodies, turbocharging kids' learning by teaching them neuroscience. And we've also already had some really amazing sponsors for the event. Jumpstart Mastery, Joe Brummer, many of you know Joe Brummer, the Attachment Trauma Network, Dr. Mona Della Hook, all sponsors, Exceptional Needs Today. They're all sponsoring. We've got some great door prizes as well that are being offered, including one I'm going to be adding later today related to our guest here. We've got a special door prize that I'll be introducing here from PDA North America. So with that, let me go ahead and get rid of this, and let's get to why you're really here today. And that's not necessarily to hear me talk, but we've got a great guest and a great presentation. And as I'm reading Diane's introduction here, I do want to encourage you, if you're watching live, I ask this every time, but if you're watching live, in the chat, let us know who you are and where you're from. It's always a lot of fun to see where people are joining us from. And I always enjoy seeing the names of people that we see week after week when we do these. It's kind of like going into a room full of friendly people, and knowing you are there is something that is important to my heart here. So let me introduce to you our special guest today, Diane Gould. And I'm going to read through, Diane. I have a really good introduction for you here, and then I'm going to add lib. So that's the part you got to watch. So I'm going to start off with a very formal introduction that you are a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in serving autistic individuals. As the director and founder of PDA North America, you have founded the annual PDA North America Conference held in Chicago, which has changed the lives of hundreds of PDA families. And in fact, maybe you can talk a little bit later about the conference, because I know you've got another one coming up here. You currently have a private practice in the suburbs of Chicago, where you serve neurodivergent children, adults, and their families. Over the last 40 plus years, you've worked with both private agencies and school systems. Diane was a childhood disability and family support specialist for the Jewish Children's Bureau for over a decade. You created many different types of programs and support groups, family camps, parent education. You established inclusion, consultation, and home visiting programs. You also have worked for 2 special education cooperatives, which resulted in working in 14 schools during your career. You, of course, have served the professional advisory board of the Autism Society of Illinois for many years, and have facilitated programs to improve relationship skills for teens and adults. You have served as you've done a lot here. You have served as a consultant and guest lecturer for many area school districts, parent associations, and private agencies. You, of course, provide assessments and consultations to families and school districts, and frequently attend school meetings. And I know you always enjoy a school meeting, right? Diane has always been interested in human behavior and how it works with individuals, parents, and schools to create support plans that increase emotional regulation. Has been vocal with her concerns that our community uses practices that increase this regulation and make behavioral challenges worse. And we're going to be talking a lot about that today, I think. You fight against punitive practices, including restraint, seclusion, suspension, and expulsion. And it was your understanding of behavior and support in the PDA literature that first drew you to learn more about PDA. And in learning about PDA led you to begin a new PDA movement in North America. You formed PDA North America at the first American PDA conference in March of 2020. Seems like yesterday.
Yeah.
And of course, you've written a book with Ruth Fidler on navigating PDA in America, which was published just over the summer. And of course, you are on a mission about awareness and understanding around PDA. And you have a nonprofit that you started. Of course, I've been fortunate enough to be on the board of PDA North America, and I think it's a fantastic organization. And also had the opportunity to join you and speak at a local regional event here in Maryland just recently, which was a blast. Diane, I've had the privilege of knowing you now for many years. In fact, I think we can go back to probably 2020, 2019 ballpark. And you tell a funny story about that, but I won't go into that now. But we've been connected since then. Of course, some interesting trivia for those that are watching. We share a birthday. We are birthday twins, and when we found that out, Diane didn't believe me. I had to show her my license and show her that we shared a birthday, which, by the way, is May 3rd. If anybody wants to gifts, it's a little ways off. Diane, welcome. It's always a pleasure to have you, and it's always good to see you, my friend. How are you?
I'm great. It's great to be here, except that bio is like way too long.
Sometimes I shorten them, but I'm like, this is one I haven't read before. So I'm going to read this whole bio, even though normally I kind of slice it down a little because I wanted to see what was new. And I happen to know there's a lot more that I could add into this bio. So you've had a career doing work. And of course, you started out in social work where I think, what I've always found is that people that go into social work are people with huge hearts that want to make a positive difference. And I know your story starts there as well. But we're going to talk today about one of the topics you are always curious about, and that's behavior. And you've got a presentation for us today called All Our Instincts About Behavior Are Wrong. So I'm going to cue that up in just a moment. I do want to encourage people, if you are watching live, and I can see by looking at my numbers here that we've got a number of people that are on here live, let us know in the chat who you are and where you're from. It's always fun to see who's joining us. And with that, Diane, I'm going to go ahead and bring your presentation up on the screen, so you don't have to do anything special. You can just wait for 1 second, and we now have your first slide. All our instincts about behavior are wrong. I want to mention to folks that are watching, we will be taking questions. We want to give Diane an opportunity to kind of get through the presentation, but we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. So what I'm going to do, with your permission, Diane, is I am going to disappear and let you take over the reins here. But what's magical is if you need me and you say my name once, twice, whatever it may take, I will magically appear and help in any way that I can. So
I love that.
Have any issue. And otherwise, as you get to the end, I'm going to jump on and we'll see what kind of questions or comments we have in the chat.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right. So I will let you take it away.
All right. So as Guy said, I'm fascinated by human behavior. I always have been. I think for many reasons, some just lack of imagination, since behavior is just, part of everyday life, and maybe also a little bit in trying to understand humans a little better than I had naturally. And it's fascinating to me how wrong we get it. And that's why I created this talk, because I think our instincts just lead us in the wrong direction. And I'm hoping this hour, is informative, but also a bit fun as we kind of make fun of ourselves in this way. I do want to say that, as Guy mentioned, I'm the founder and executive director of PDA North America. And I have learned more about behavior and supporting distressed behavior in the last 5 years, focusing on serving PDA people, than the 35 years prior. And just in case anyone doesn't know, so PDA is an autistic profile that originally was called pathological demand avoidance, but many people now call it persistent drive for autonomy. But if anyone doesn't know, and we're just using acronyms, which I kind of hate, that's what we're talking about. But PDA has taught me about understanding behavior and supporting people with behavior. And I want to start kind of confession, right? So I got it so wrong. I wanted to know about behavior. So at some point in my career, I'm really bad with like timelines. So maybe 20 years ago or so, I became a board certified behavior analyst because that made sense to do if you wanted to know everything about behavior. And I hadn't quite got my head around the consequences of that and the history of, behaviorism being more about changing who people are. When I had first read a comparison with conversion therapy, that really freaked me out. And in talking to autistic adults who had experienced ABA therapy in their lives and were traumatized by it, after lots of soul searching and many conversations with Guy, I quit being a BCBA, which I don't think anyone ever does because it's really hard to become a BCBA. And I was able to support kids in Chicago who are really struggling in school and having lawsuits because I was a BCBA. So I had to kind of give that up. But I have not looked back. I was happy to give it up, in part because I believed, and it's part of being a behavior analyst, I believed in a behavioral approach, which was pretty misguided. I believed in a reward and consequence approach. And now I do not. I didn't consider brain science. And most of what I've learned and changed, I've listened to autistic people, which has really made my practice change. So I'm not pointing fingers because I think this stuff is hard. We make mistakes. We're always going to make mistakes when it comes to supporting other people behaviorally. And it's our instincts and practices that lead us in the wrong direction. So I'm going to highlight kind of all the mistakes we make, but I'm not wanting anyone to take this personally. This again is part of the human experience. So when I think about my career in behavior, my undergraduate degree, I went to a college that didn't have a social work undergraduate for no good reason. I don't know what I was thinking. So I majored in psych, and we had to train rats. And it wasn't until really decades later, I thought, well, that doesn't make sense. Why would we learn about human behavior by training rats? I didn't mind Rat Lab. And my albino rat was called Ebony Libido. I thought I was very clever as an 18-year-old student. But I was successful at training my rats. But humans are not rats or pigeons. And one of the things that we all who study behavior get wrong is we focus on reactive strategies instead of proactive strategies. We focus in behavioral work on what to do after behavior of concern or dysregulated behavior or challenging behavior instead of how to prevent it, which is strange. So our approach is backwards. This is my favorite slide. Donkey backwards, right? We focus on the behavior and getting rid of it instead of the root cause or causes, those whys. It's so silly. I think, like, when I think about this now and I say it, it just seems silly. And we focus on them instead of focusing on ourselves. But really, like, that's how we change behavior of others, by changing our own. And we don't often focus on really understanding ourselves when it comes to supporting people who have challenging behavior. We have to know our own history, which usually lies in childhood. our own triggers with behavior, how we deal with stress, what we need to be effective, including support, and how good or bad we are at asking for support. And I also think, not everybody agrees, but I think we all have this little punitive streak in ourselves that we have to understand, be mindful of, and keep under wraps. And we can talk about that if anybody does. Lots of people, including Mona DeLaHook, talk a lot about the iceberg in terms of behavior. So all our talk is about that little part of observable behavior that's above the water. But what we need to pay attention to and where we need to direct our support is underneath the water. That's where life experience, learning disabilities, sensory differences, auditory processing, trauma, all the important things are under the water. But what our paperwork, and we're working on supporting individuals, and our language, what we talk about, is focused on this little tiny part above the water. So we just focus on the tip. And Ross Green, one of the thing I like best, he says, is that behavior that we see is only a sign or signal that there's a problem. It's not the problem. We also pretend like changing behavior is easy. I go to lots of school meetings and I've been parts of many IEP kind of development and behavior plans. And a 7-year-old might have 10 goals about changing behavior, where most adults can't keep one New Year's resolution. So we buy into this fallacy that children, basically students, clients, just should be able to change a behavior because that's what we want them to do. We're also so weak at being able to change what we do. And especially, I find in schools, we're just so attached to the way things have always been done, the way we do things. And sometimes we have a hard time conceiving that there could be a different way of doing things. And I found through supporting many people that we really need a paradigm shift, just like tweaking things, which is generally where we start, isn't enough. There needs to be a whole paradigm shift to support people behaviorally in a way that works. And we're emotionally wrong. We forget about emotions. In the behavior world, we don't talk about it. So I always call it the F word just to be provocative, right? Feelings and emotions, because that's the reason behavior is not always logical. And so much of behavior is anxiety and stress driven. I used to think, in the old days, like if people said, like, what is somebody trying to escape? I give simplistic answers like math or music class, where I've learned along the way that it's usually the feelings and emotions that are being escaped. How math makes someone feel incompetent, inferior, frustrated, bored, embarrassed, humiliated. It's the emotions that often are part or underneath the behavior. But in the behavioral support world, you're not really allowed to mention feelings. If any of you have kind of had a behavior assessment or been part of it, or your child, they're called functional behavior assessments. And they're based on the belief that all behavior has a function. And it's usually like to escape or to get something, to attain something tangible or attention. They're very simplistic functions. And now I understand that most observable behaviors are a nervous system response. And generally, they're an unconscious nervous system response, not a choice, based on sensing threat, and seeking safety. So the whole concept of function is wrong and misguided. But that is what is written into our laws about supporting students, functional behavior assessments. And besides them just being wrong from a nervous system standpoint, the conversation generally ends just at the function, not thinking, all right, if someone needs control, that probably means they're anxious, or if it looks like someone needs attention, which triggers me that conversation, they're probably needing some connection. And why does somebody need to avoid or escape? I mentioned in here that the word school refusal, because that is really a trigger word for me, or trigger words. And I've been working to change the language around that to needs-based non-attendance. When kids cannot get their needs met in school, they're not able to attend. And as one PDA or adult explained to me when I was starting to work in PDA, that if a place is like bad for your well-being, it's just a smart choice not to go there, which makes sense. So keeping in mind the nervous system instead of the function, that leads us in a better direction. And right, so fight, flight, and freeze. Those are the phases for the nervous system, right? When there's neuroception says that there is threat. And I, kind of just because I'm obsessive, have gone through kind of all the behaviors and all the kids I've worked with, and fight, flight, and freeze was behind every one of the documented challenging behavior. We respond the way our brain tells us to do. And certain people, especially autistic people, including PDA people, other neurodivergent people, have highly sensitive nervous systems. Another thing that kind of blows my mind is the longstanding practice of isolating people when they need co-regulation in schools and homes. People think that giving a timeout is a good idea. And when I was studying to be a behavior analyst, there's lots of lessons on timeouts, right? But when you use the nervous system lens, it doesn't make any sense, because co-regulation is how people are going to have felt safety, how their nervous systems are going to sense safety. And that can't happen without a co-regulator. When I worked in schools, so often I was struck by staff thinking that challenging behavior is intentional when it's not, that it was a conscious choice. We think that people have so much more control over their behavior than they do. Kids still are told all the time, like, make a good choice. It's not so easy. It doesn't work that way. And one of the things that took me so long to figure out is that the focus on antecedents makes no sense, because stress, which is underneath challenging behavior, is cumulative. So what happens is antecedents are the last straw. All this builds up over time. And that's why humans are inconsistent. And it's also why in our ABC, antecedent behavior consequence method of supporting challenging behavior, why it doesn't work. Because we are identifying things that are just the last straw. So when we change that, it doesn't solve the problem. because it wasn't the problem in the first place. And this is a message I feel is so important, and I try to talk a lot about it. And it makes sense for me. We also forget about skills, right? Especially in school, if we want people to do things differently, they have to have the skills to do it. And they have to have the skills to do it at the times and under the circumstances and conditions that we're wanting them to do it, which generally is a time they can't access the thinking part of their brain. So there's kind of this setup for failure when we talk about skills. We also focus just on the problems for people with challenging behavior instead of improving overall quality of life, because we can decrease or eliminate problem behaviors without even talking about behaviors, without targeting them, without noticing them, but looking at someone's life and thinking like, are they having the connections, the social connections they're seeking? Do they have people in their life who really like them and care about them? Are they busy with satisfying tasks and engaged in learning and feel like they have control over their life? There's like so many things to look at to build a happy life for people. But instead of using our meeting times and our energy on that, we often just focus on this observable behavioral problem. We get it so wrong there. And these are these pioneers of inclusion. I can't even remember, the 70s maybe, for people with disabilities, and their behavior assessment I love because they never mentioned behavior. It was really just about quality of life. And they also included how do we help the person's supporters get the support they need. They were so ahead of their time, and we haven't really caught up to. This is what all people need, right? Relationships, feeling successful, having meaningful activities and fun. And being heard, which often doesn't happen. So we have to understand behavior before we get rid of it, which again isn't really the system. And if we don't understand behavior, we can just create something more problematic. And it's really a game of whack-a-mole. We knock down one behavior and another one pops up because we haven't addressed the whys or the underlying causes. And people get satisfied just playing whack-a-mole because you can get this short-term success that feels good. And also sometimes if we don't understand behavior, and I've seen this over and over, we could eliminate behaviors that are actually helpful to the individual. I'm thinking of kids in school, like walking around, being while they're in the classroom, they might be able to only focus and process the language and the lesson if their body is moving. But if we just want them to sit, then they won't be learning. And in schools, and most of us thought rewards and positive reinforcement were wonderful and problem-free. And it's not the case, but still most people believe it. Even people who, are kind of in process of enlightenment and thinking, all right, maybe consequences or punishment aren't the best way. We're still kind of wed to rewards and feel good about them, but they can cause problems as well. So one way I think about it is that rewards focus on motivation, and motivation alone is never the problem. Anything that causes people to, quote unquote, be more motivated add stress and pressure. And praise is part of that as well. And it can get in the way of pleasure and motivation, being able to do things. And at best, it's only short term. And research is, there's all kinds of cool research on this, saying that even like pro-social behaviors, like please and thank you, if they're rewarded, they're less likely to happen under conditions when they're not rewarded. And that was kind of eye-opening for me too. But they add stress and pressure, and that backfires. And they can cause long-term problems. And that's a whole other talk. And you guys might have had other talks on that, because I know Connie and I did a talk once on the problems with rewards. And consequences really aren't as important as we think they are. They're not necessary. We do them often, or give consequences sometimes, to make ourselves feel better, or because we think we should, or we don't want to be judged, letting someone get away with it and not get a consequence. But yeah, consequences don't change behavior of people that are struggling, and they don't change behavior for most people. We don't need consequences. We think we do, but we don't. And as I said before, what things we use for motivation can backfire and produce the opposite result. And I think so much stems from, I've been obsessing about this recently. And I was thinking about it in schools. Like we have this mindset that the kids in class won't do work, won't want to learn, won't help if we don't motivate them to. Like, we don't have any trust in them to do the right thing. So we set up all these practices to motivate them and reward them, where I've always found kids want to do the right thing. And kids naturally are curious and want to learn. But we start with this mindset that drives kind of how we support and address kids. So just from the start, we're kind of getting it wrong. We communicate wrong. We talk all the time to kids about the behaviors we don't want to see, so much more than what we do want to see. Stop running, stop talking. We don't talk about what we want from them and help them give that to us. If you were in a classroom and you counted, you would see so much more. We're talking about the behaviors we don't want to see. And we do too much, which is such a weird concept to me. Especially in schools, I always think about like poor teachers' assistants, right? So that was my first job out of college. I lasted 6 weeks. It was probably the hardest job I ever had. And it's really hard to be a teacher's assistant too, because you want the teacher to think you're doing a good job. So that leads you to intervene so much more than you probably need to. So you're doing things too much, which makes everything worse, because it's so hard to do nothing. I think it's the hardest intervention at all, to just like be quiet and present with another person, not rush in to nag them, to prompt them, to remind them, to give them instruction. And sometimes it is because we're fearful of being judged by other adults. But doing nothing often is the best thing. I just this year read a quote from Buddha that said, oh my gosh, what is something like, don't do something, just stand there, or something like that. The opposite of what we usually do. We also treat behavior challenges as knowledge deficits. I feel like in my work, I talk about this every day. Some people believe me and some people don't, but we generally respond to challenging behavior by explaining to the child why it wasn't nice to hit their friend, or why this behavior is not okay, or what the expectation is, or the school rule is. We act like the child didn't know versus that they were dysregulated. Some schools even have the kids repeat back the rule or the expectation or what they should have done instead. And none of that is helpful, because I've really never seen the why in a challenging behavior be a knowledge deficit, really. Kids who swear or talk back, the most common response for the adult is, that language isn't allowed, or you're not allowed to be disrespectful, but everyone knows that stuff, right? So it just gets in the way of our relationship. It's not helpful. It doesn't have any chance in decreasing the behavior. And I also think it can give the message to kids that, like, I don't understand you. I don't understand what's going on with you. I don't understand where you are right now, because we're dealing with the wrong thing. So that's my 2 cents on that. And we also teach lessons or make comments when they're not useful. So either when someone's dysregulated, because we know they can't learn and they can't problem solve and they can't use that part of the brain, or after the fact, if someone spills something, we might say, be more careful, or if somebody trips, we might say, watch your step. It's just not helpful at all. It just makes someone feel bad. And it's a more talk. It's a waste of language. And again, so often adults talk to someone who's not emotionally regulated and they can't process what we're saying. So all our guidance or words of wisdom cannot be used. And then we're kind of frustrated because we've been lecturing and it's not working. And we tell people to calm down, and never in the history of humans has anyone ever calmed down because they were told to calm down. If anything, it makes us more upset. So if any of you watching have a spouse or a partner and you've had a horrible day and you come home and you want to talk about it and they tell you to calm down, it's only going to make you more angry, I think. That's how my experience has always been. So it'd be nice to rid people of saying this. I noticed on TV they say it all the time too. We can be pretty misguided in how we support people. I've noticed a trend that we can give the level of support we want someone to need instead of what they actually need. Kind of acting like if we don't help someone who's struggling, they'll be able to do it on their own. That is not the case. And I say with the population I specialize in, they need so much support than we think they need, or the student needs so much more support than it looks like they need from observing them just on the outside. Because what's happening on the inside and how it looks on the outside can be so different. We also terrify kids, teens, young adults by our focus on independence, and we don't really talk about interdependence. Yet most of us live kind of interdependent lives. We have people who we rely on, and when we make it seem to kids like they have to master everything and handle everything because they're going to be independent one day, it scares them, and it's not true. So I think interdependence is such a better concept, but we are so not used to talking about that. And we don't pay enough attention to our nonverbal communication, and it's what matters the most. How we support someone, whether it works or not, often comes down to our nonverbal communication. I can consult to schools, and they might say, well, I've said what you've told me to say to the student and it didn't work. But how they said it was so different than the intent, right? So body language, 55%, tone of voice, 38%, words as little as 7% makes a huge difference. So we need to have that awareness and have that in check if we're trying to support people who are distressed. And the whole concept of ignoring people is really triggering for me. And it's part of just a typical behavioral approach to kids and adults. Like, so-and-so wants attention, so we're ignoring them. And even planned ignoring, which I was trained in and I didn't question years ago, which is also called differential reinforcement. Humans shouldn't be ignored, period. It's not going to ever be helpful, but it's so much part of how we address behavior. We also get escalation wrong, and this took me probably until the last year or two, because I've always known individuals who go from 0 to 60 in a heartbeat, but it took me until a year or two ago to realize it's because their baseline is 50 or 55, and they probably don't even know it because they always feel that way. And that's why it doesn't take very much to kind of go to 60. Hoping that is helpful to some of you. And we also think things are okay when they're not, when they're quiet, when they're not causing us problems because of masking and camouflaging. And one of the things that pains me now is looking back in my career, wondering how many kids I thought were okay when they were not okay. And still teachers and other people when I talk to will be like, oh, I'm sure so-and-so's okay. They're not causing any problems in school. They look fine. When that's not the case, and often for my population, the teachers first find out that the student was not okay when they stop coming to school. Adults always talk too much and don't listen enough. Maybe there's some people who are exceptions to this, but adults talk a lot. And I think there's all kinds of reasons why we don't listen to children sometimes the way we should. Sorry if you can hear my dog. And it's hard too, because sometimes the child or the individual is just having a really hard time explaining things to us, or they're not really sure about their wants or feelings. So I think the more we can try to repeat back and figure it out, like that's the work, that process of figuring them out through listening. And I also find it's so important and hard for so many of us to not try to convince them otherwise or talk them out of their reality, because that just strengthens the intensity of a position. And they'll have to kind of up it to convince you of the magnitude of their situation or distress. It could be as simple as a kid coming home just saying, Mr. Smith is the worst teacher in the whole world. He hates me. He's so unfair. And, like a typical parent just saying, oh, but sometimes Mr. Smith is nice. You've said he's nice at times, or, he's got 30 kids that he's trying to pay attention to, or blah, blah, blah. But we need to meet people where they are. And when we jump to those other conclusions, we also rob them of the ability to ever get there on their own. Because sometimes a kid might be able to later say, all right, well, I guess sometimes Mr. Smith's been nice to me. Maybe he was having a bad day. But if we say it, they won't be able to. We rob it. We also, after an incident, when we're talking to a child, can fool ourselves or convince ourselves that we're providing necessary guidance, but what we're really doing is increasing shame. I am not a believer in processing a challenging behavior afterwards. I don't feel it's felt helpful or necessary. I think you just need to let it go. You can bring it up at a time later if it's useful, if they're going to be in a situation where it's likely that the same thing's going to happen. You can proactively use that information to make a plan and problem solve in advance at the right time. But afterwards, I don't see anything helpful. Just use the time to reconnect. And schools are all taught, and parents, that you're supposed to process and talk about a behavior problem. But I'm not a believer. And when we do these kind of things as parents or professionals in the name of behavior, it's easy to rationalize that we're doing something for their own good, when it's more the case of how we've been taught, how we've been socialized, our fear of not doing discipline or handling behavior correctly, and what that's going to mean in the future. So sometimes we rationalize. And often we forget that changing environmental components can make such a huge difference. And the first line of support in most settings is rewards and consequences, instead of let's see if we can make the environment, whatever's happening, work better for the individual. We also don't take into consideration that where someone is in their window of tolerance and their level of anxiety should be synchronized with how important the demand or our ask is of them. Because only looking at one and not both, or thinking of synchronizing them, can lead us in the wrong direction. These dials come out of all the PDA books, and I love them when I first saw them, and I think they're really helpful. And we undervalue simple kindness and worry that it will reward challenging behavior. And I kind of want this on a t-shirt. Kindness doesn't reward challenging behavior. It doesn't. And kindness makes such a difference. And we think we're angels, right? But we do have that punitive streak, I think. And I know I'm probably preaching to the choir because you're at an Alliance event, right? Compassion over compliance, caring over control, the golden rule. I have always done operating my practice based on the golden rule, even though some people say the platinum rule is better, like treat people the way they need to. One of my mantras with my clients and people in my life, I'm always talking about blaming situations, not people, because many of us are quick to blame. Another thing in working with the schools that I think is just so strange is that paraprofessionals who spend so much time with many of the kids I support, they're the least included. They don't even get invited to IEPs. They're not part of these bigger discussions, but they're kind of the boots on the ground, right? And, staff members with the lowest level of education and least training get the hardest jobs with the hardest kids. It doesn't really make any sense to me. It's always been the system, not just in schools. I've worked in group homes when I was young, all night long with hard kids. Where the social worker therapist type would come and go during the day for an hour or two at a time, where my shifts were 12 hours. I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense to me. The same way as this, right? When kids are included from special ed into regular ed, they're usually included in the worst classes. More kids have problems in music, art, and gym, where most of my clients would do so much better in social studies or science for their general ed class. I don't know. To me, it's topsy-turvy. And just like recess is the hardest time of the day for most kids, but that is not where we put in their social work minutes or their OT minutes in any of the school I worked at. We don't have people kind of supervising and paying attention and offering support or even taking data. They're just kind of let on their own, sometimes with volunteers, and that's can be the hardest part of the day. Advocacy. I find that whole concept so interesting in that I believe most of my clients spend at least the early part of their life advocating, saying, leave me alone. I don't want to do this. Get away from me. We just didn't like what they were saying. And then some just kind of stopped. And then they get older, 14 usually, and then we write IEP goals for self-advocacy. But sometimes those kids don't even know what they need, or especially if it's a transition to a new setting, like middle school to high school or high school to college. Even college, how would they know in a new situation what kind of support they should advocate for? Doesn't make any sense to me. And like I said earlier about eliminating behaviors that are actually helpful. Like for most of my career, I thought when kids negotiated, they were being difficult or resisting. We're now working with PDA kids. I understand that is their way of trying to please us, to be able to do the task we want or follow the request by kind of taking it under their control on their own terms. They are trying to please us. So if we say get off the tablet at 10 minutes and they say 15, we need to say yes. Or if we're like hamburgers or hot dogs for dinner and they say pizza, they're trying to comply and not be difficult or negotiate or postpone. It has a very different meaning now to me than the years where I would say don't negotiate with terrorists or 7-year-olds. And we also forget that emotions are contagious. We can't expect the person we're with to be calm if we are frustrated. Emotions are contagious. We know that from research with little babies, but sometimes we forget when we're dysregulated. And we confuse times to teach or lecture with times to just calm in a crisis. There's a retired psychologist who was very cool. And he'd say, when a person is drowning is not the time to teach them to swim. And he had this video on his website, right? There's times to manage crisis and there's times to teach. And the saddest part, I think, in my career is that our crisis intervention approaches escalate distressed behavior and make things work. And I've been working on that and trying to change that for decades, and it is an uphill climb. Guy and I are involved with Studio 3, Andy McDonald's low arousal approach, which is a really nice crisis intervention approach because it's about targeting the staff's or the parent's behavior and not the child's. Part of it is, he says, manage the stress, not the behavior, but it's the opposite of what we typically do. Avoid dominating behavior, keeping a distance, which is not what happens in a school when someone is dysregulated. People get louder, they get closer, and we don't wait. We might even touch the person, which of course is going to trigger a fight response too. But in the low arousal approach, we wait, and generally the crisis passes. And if there's a mess, the adult cleans it up, not the kid, which kind of blows people's minds. And you can just sit quietly, offer hot chocolate, be calm and nurturing, and not force people to talk. It's so different too. And I think some of this stems from like, we forget like the kid is, or the client isn't the only person in the interaction who has a nervous system. And we can pretend that if we're with a rigid person, that like if we're rigid, things are going to turn out well. But rigid and rigid does not equal flexible. It's all about our own emotional regulation. That is what we need. And we're not, most of us in kind of a helping profession or parents don't prioritize self-care. And I get it. There's not a lot of time for it. And all this is hard. And I don't want it to sound like I think it's easy to support someone with distressed behavior. And we're only human, and we're going to make mistakes all the time. So be kind to yourself. All right. That is all I've got.
And I am back, so I'm going to make your presentation go away here.
Magic.
So there you go, and you can make it go away too. And if you do, you'll be able to see me, and I'll be able to see you.
Yay!
Yeah. So you know, of course, I've heard you present many times, and I think actually you gave a version of this presentation at a conference we were at together about a year ago, and I was like, oh, you need to come on the Alliance, and
That's right.
It
was
November. Well. Yeah. Well, you know, we're still booking out at like a year in advance, which is both a good problem to have, but also I'm not always patient. So yeah, it's a little challenging. We've had a number of people that have weighed in on the chat and left some comments here, and I'll hit a couple of those. But if you are watching live, you have an opportunity, if you have any questions or comments, to put those in the chat. And I'm just going to steer through a few things here right now. We had Divinis here saying, I'm finally free to watch your presentation live. It's been so long. Thanks for all you do. I have a friend from Australia here, and it is Friday morning in Australia, probably what, 8 something, 8:30-ish. So joining from across the globe. And someone here from Nova Scotia.
I want to go there.
Yeah. Let's see. A couple of comments here. I like needs-based non-attendance as an alternative. Our community has been pushing back in the term school refusal also. Yep. Somebody here from Span in New Jersey joining us. I've got a individual here from Kansas saying this is excellent. Can't wait to read your book. And we'll put a link to the chat in the a link to the book in the chat as well. Somebody else talking about, let's see, how consequences make us feel better. Yeah. At least in the short term sometimes.
Because feeling powerless is a bad feeling.
Yeah. Sometimes it feels worse in the long term as well. And I haven't read through this whole one yet, but we'll read through it together here. Chrissy says, I would also add that it's not just kids. Okay. My son was 10 when he's pushed out of school for behavior. He is now 18, still out of school. Now he is an adult. I would love to hear these things talked about, not just in regards to kids, but anyone, in our case, a young adult with a syndrome that comes with intellectual disability and non-speaking.
Yeah, see, it's funny. I'm so old that I use the term kid for kind of anyone under 40. So it's probably a bad habit. So true.
Yeah. A couple other comments here, just as you were speaking. We got a truth and 100% for me. Um, yeah. So yeah, lots of good comments here. Let's see. Got
I like the one that just came up. Right. I mean, when you don't do something like at the grocery store, even, right?
mhm.
Like you're just thinking like everybody is waiting for me to discipline the kid. And if I don't, like they're thinking about me. And I remember that feeling too. And it makes us do things we shouldn't do. And in
Mhm, mhm.
schools, it happens all the time. Teachers discipline kids because they're afraid of the judgment from coworkers and administrators.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah, and often I think, don't know what else to do. Had their own experiences. I mean, you know this because I say it a lot, but it all comes back to you began by talking about this is non-judgmental. This is a journey. You shared a bit about your own journey, and certainly there was there's this arc of learning and changing, and I mean, it gets back to the words I love so much from Maya Angelou. Kind of the do the best you can until you know better, and then when you know better, do better. That's what this is all about. This is about
Yeah.
there's so much information out there today that we should know better. We should be beyond trying to train kids like they're rats or pigeons, but this is still very prevalent practice in many areas and many places that are working with children. And so much of this is really about changing the adult mindset. And again, to be gracious to ourselves, we may have grown up and come through systems that were very different, but still that doesn't negate the fact that we know better now, and knowing
Yeah,
better, it's not just about you can do better, but I think you've got that obligation to do better.
I agree.
Yeah. You shared some really interesting things. And one of the things, every time I hear you, I mean, even if I've heard the talk before, there's something that catches my ear or that I just relate to. And I was thinking about, as you were talking about like inclusion and how all the time schools, in the name of inclusion, put kids in crowded cafeterias or PE class. I
Yeah,
remember when I pushed back against our school district on that. It was a really tough pushback, because that was the only way they could imagine,
right.
like you said, like there's these other opportunities where we've got students that may have high levels of interest or a lot to offer, and we pass those by and we put them in these really difficult environments. And you know what, Diane, I have seen in some of those settings, that they are often, unfortunately, where something begins that leads to a kid being restrained or secluded, or something else happening in a art class, in a music class, in a in a busy cafeteria. Yeah, your title says this, I think, really well. All our instincts, and in parentheses, it's almost like, and all the things you learned were wrong.
Right. Right.
Um, yeah, yeah. This has been really great. Um, and as what's really interesting too is your journey into PDA and the self-reflection and kind of all of the things that and you're somebody that, as I read through your intro here, which is lengthy, you've been doing this for a while, and I love that you bring to this the constant curiosity and learning. I think that's so critical. I mean, I think if you could give no other simpler advice to anyone, that's working with, supporting, helping, in some way involved with other humans, it's be curious, right?
Right. And be like, give yourself permission to like change your mind.
Right, right.
And it takes so much unlearning too, not just learning new things. I think they have to happen simultaneously.
Absolutely. So I wanted to ask you. We mentioned it in the introduction here, but I just wanted to ask you, if you would tell us a little bit about the upcoming PDA North America conference.
Yes.
You've got a
Yeah.
conference coming up, and yeah, tell us about that.
And if I were organized, I would really like have it on my phone, all the details. It's going to be great. So I can say, so every year we've had a conference since my first one in 2020, and every year it's gotten more elaborate, and this one's our most elaborate. It's a hybrid format generally. We have Wednesday, which I think is March 5th, is all virtual. Thursday is hybrid, so it'll be a live event outside Chicago, but also available live stream. And then Friday is just in person. And we're having amazing speakers. I think 75% are autistic of our speakers. Oh, thank you for that. Good. Hopefully there's a schedule. And hopefully I got the dates right. So we're talking about really good things. We're talking about PDA and mental health. We're talking about having an accurate understanding of autism. We're talking about autism, ADHD, OCD, all by really respected speakers. Talking about research being done in PDA, burnout, the nervous system. We're talking about low demand lifestyle. And we're also, if people can come in person, we're spending our last day in small group discussions with respected facilitators, just talking about the things that are important to people, including education and learning and parenting and adult living as a PDA adult and behavior. There's, yeah, you were at the workshop, the energy of a PDA conference is really, it's the most amazing thing I've experienced. It's being in a big ballroom with people who have similar lived experience, who get it, who don't judge you. And it also brings together professionals and parents so people can learn from each other and connect. And there's been kind of lifelong kind of connections and relationships. Friends.
Yeah, it sounds like a fantastic event. I'm really going to I think make an effort to try to get out there this year. So if there's anything I can do to help out, let me know. And I think
if you're there,
try to get it on the calendar here. So as we're wrapping up here, and I promised that I would get you out the door on time to do the next thing that's on your list here, which is going to be just here in a minute or two. But any final words you want to leave us with as we're wrapping up here today?
Well, I think just besides the PDA conference, I wanted to just note it'd be wonderful if people could spend some time on the PDA North America website. We have many webinars, and we have on all kinds of topics. We have trainings for professionals. We have like an insights area, which is blogs on different topics. We have downloadable resources. There's just a wealth of information, but what's probably used the most is we have a PDA affirming provider list. And we also started fairly recently for people who've had good success with schools to list.
That's great. Yeah, and I know you mentioned to me that you're really trying to put some work into that in the coming year. And that's something that really is helpful to families. I mean, I will tell you, and I know I've shared it with you before, but increasingly, I'm hearing from more parents and families of kids that fit that PDA profile that are unfortunately experiencing, restraint, seclusion, and a lot of other punitive things. So those resources and PDA affirming schools and providers, I think, is really important. So we reached the end of our. Oops, go ahead.
Can I say one thing? And all goes well in the world, which I probably shouldn't say because not everything's going.
The world is upside down, but
yeah, right. So, all right, I'm going to stop using that expression. In spring, we're hoping to launch a self-paced training for schools.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to that. Listen, Diane, it's been a pleasure to have you here. I always enjoy having a chance to talk to you. It's been a fantastic presentation. We're going to go ahead and say goodbye to everybody. I'm going to ask you to stick around for a second, but thank you so much for being here. And those of you that were joining us here live, thank you. Thank you for being here. And please, we always ask, share these with others, share these with other families, other educators. The way that we can influence change is by getting people to know more and do better. So thank you, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks, Diane.
Thanks.